just turned 14. He was 24, so he's 10 years older than me. He would pick me up from school. I'd have my school uniform. This was happening all over our town, and the authorities were turning a complete blind eye. They didn't want to be called racist or Islamophobic. He says he's going to set us on fire and watch us burn. I'll be honest, I do think I'll be killed for it.
You truly believe that?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, Gold Seal. I use their products every single day, and now I finally get to work with them. I use their products for anti-inflammatory, reduced anxiety, better sleep, and mental clarity. I'm going to put a link to their website in the description, along with a 10% discount code for you to take advantage of. Go and have a look at their website, see if there's anything in there for you. I hope you enjoy this week's episode, and good health. Sammy.
Hello.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So it's the 10-year anniversary since the mainstream media reported on the Rotherham grooming gangs. Yeah. So let's find out more about you.
Okay.
And I know parts of this interview are going to be tough, but I'm going to be right here with you, on side, so you're in good company. We'll take it right back. Were you born and bred in Rotherham?
Yeah, so I grew up in Rotherham, and I've actually got a really good childhood. And I think it's important for me to share this part of my story because there's a lot of people that think you can only be groomed and exploited if you come from, really bad background, if you're in a care home. And but I grew up with my family, both mum and dad. I've got two older sisters. We lived on a council estate, and my mum and dad later bought their home. But growing up, loads of great memories. All the kids, we'd all play out, playing army on the bikes. I was a very outdoorsy child, very confident, popular, had lots of friends. There was, I suppose, nothing vulnerable about me apart from the obvious, and that was a child.
And what year were you born?
1985, so I'm now 39 years old.
Okay.
But my kind of joy as a child was dancing. So from the age of 4 years old, I started doing all different kind of dancing, and I made the team, which was called the British Aerobic Championship Squad. And I would go all around the country, competing against all the other kids, and we was great at it. We was the team that was the one to beat. And we even got asked to go to, I think it was Tokyo or somewhere, to represent Britain. So I thought that I had all my life planned out. I thought I was going to grow up to be the world's greatest dancer. Obviously, it didn't quite turn out that way.
And what was school life like?
I liked school. I had lots of friends. I was bubbly. I'll be honest, I weren't particularly interested in the maths and English and all that kind of stuff because I was a very sporty child. I just wanted to dance. I loved the sports. I was involved in the cross country and all that kind of stuff. So, but no, life at school was good.
And your mum and dad's relationship, was that solid?
Yeah, my dad, he was very much always out at work. So he was a painter and decorator by trade. He then went and got a pool centre, which was in a place called Masborough, which is actually how he first come into contact with my rapist. So he owned a snooker club, and my rapist, when he was a child, actually came and stole my dad's car. Now, at the time, my dad drove a Sierra Cosworth. So back then, it was a very flash car, kind of talker of the community. So, yeah, that's how we come into contact with that. But, yeah, my mum and dad had a good relationship back then. I was very close to my mum. My dad was more, my mum and dad are total opposites of each other, but my dad was the stricter parent, the main provider, as my mum were more like my best friend.
So would you say that you were not vulnerable as a child? Apart
from being a child, and of course every child is vulnerable, but apart from that, no, I was very headstrong. And, even if you go back and you talk to professionals that knew me as a child, they say that was actually part of one of the reasons why it was so difficult to get out of the grooming process, because I was so headstrong.
Because I know what's coming, and I'd imagine a lot of people watching this, they're also aware of what's to come, just makes me think that the fact that someone comes from a solid family unit are still able to be groomed and raped and taken full advantage of. Yeah. These young girls that do come from vulnerable, fractured homes, what chance would they ever stand?
Exactly.
What chance would they stand? So describe Rotherham to me as a town.
Rotherham's a small town, obviously known for all the wrong reasons now, but, for me it was home. We was just an ordinary working class family. I'm not going to sit here and say we were all, perfect. Of course we weren't. Families have their faults, but we was just your ordinary family growing up in Rotherham. My dad were a successful businessman. So yeah, it was home.
Multicultural?
I'd say growing up. So for example, in my school, we were mostly white. There's only two people I remember being black. There was certain parts in Rotherham. So for example, where my dad had his pool centre is a place called Masborough. Wrong term to use, but it was known as Pakiland. So you would have majority of Pakistani Muslim people that live there, and that's same in different areas. So in Ferrum, and then you might have your place where I grew up in Munsborough, which is mostly of white people. I think it's definitely changing now, but you still have your certain areas, and it's kind of always felt like that divide is there. But growing up, that kind of never interested me. It was something I never really picked up on. I kind of grew up around Pakistani Muslims. One of my closest friends was a black girl. So race never bothered me. It was just something I grew up with.
So how did you meet your rapist?
So I was at just my local shop, wrong place, wrong time, I suppose, with my friend. My friend already knew him. And he pulled up in the car, his silver sports car, and he got out and he was talking to my friend. And I remember the moment I saw him, and I'll never forget it. A bit embarrassed to say this now, but at the time I thought, oh my God, he's really fit. Who's he? He was 24, really muscly. He was, known for going to the gym all the time, all designer clothes on. And he didn't look your usual paedophile, because growing up, I always got taught a paedophile is some fat old man, masturbating at school kids out of his flat window, or somebody that had pull up in a van, offer you some sweets, kidnap you, and you'd never see your mum and dad again. And of course that didn't happen, where we lived. So he didn't fit the usual prescription of what a paedophile looks like. So he asked us if we wanted to go for a spin in the car.
And how old were you at this stage?
I was 14. I just turned 14. He was 24, so he's 10 years older than me. And I knew his brother a little bit as well. And I think because of that, it didn't feel like a complete stranger, because, again, my friend knew him. But as well, I didn't understand the risks. And when I got in that car, I had no idea. But that was a moment that would change my life forever. And I would go on to be mentally, sexually and physically abused for several years. And even after that stopped, the effects, it'll stay with me and last till the day I die.
What's his name?
So his real name is Arshad Hussain, but people know him as Mad Ash.
Mad Ash.
Because it was crazy. So yeah, he was known as Mad Ash.
And just what's his full name again?
Arshad Hussain.
Okay. I know the answer to this question because I too was exposed to horrific stuff when I was 14, but I'm going to ask it anyway. When you saw this guy at the shops for the first time and you're just 14 and he's visibly much older than you, when he asked you to go for a drive with him, did it cross your mind at all that it was odd that a man of his age would ask a girl of your age to join him for a drive?
No, because everybody around me were doing that anyway. You'd have us as young girls and there'd always be lads or men, that are older than us hanging about. So for me, it was kind of like the norm. So yeah, it was obviously very different once I got involved with him. And I always said that grooming is the most dangerous of crimes for two reasons. One, because it's a crime that happens and you don't even realise it's happening. But it's also an enjoyable crime. So when I was being groomed and exploited, it wasn't just straight away, dark violence. There was times when, it was great. It was happy, we'd have fun. He came into my world, found out everything there was to know about me, who I was, my friends, my family, what kind of movies I like, what kind of music and all this. And it turned out we had a lot in common because he liked all the same things as what I liked, and all his friends knew my friends. And once he got all that information, he then took me into his world, which of course is very different to mine. It's very dark, very violent, and once you're inside it, it's very difficult to get out of it. But it was very clever what he did as well with all my relationships with family and friends, and he worked out who all the strongest and weakest link were. And over time, he would turn me against people in my family, and he'd do that so it would make it harder for me to, kind of go and tell someone if I needed help. But yeah, in the beginning, I didn't recognise at all that this was wrong.
What happened on that very first drive?
So we went for a drive. We went to a flat, and there was quite a few people there, so we weren't on his own. And that was it, really. It kind of just started instantly. And it'd start where he would come and pick me up, and, I might be a little bit late and stuff. And I remember not coming home. I don't know how long I'd met him. I think it were only kind of a couple of days or weeks or whatever. But my parents reported it to the police, and the police came out and said, well, she's making a lifestyle choice. She's making her own choices. And of course, my mum and dad weren't happy because they knew him. They knew we were a bit of a wrong un. And I was only 14. But yeah, I thought my mum and dad were just being a typical mum and dad, didn't know what they were on about. I know everything. And didn't want to see any wrongdoing in it.
That's shocking beyond belief that the police would say that you're making a lifestyle choice at 14.
Yeah. I remember as well that night being sat in the car and he stroked my face. And I lied to begin. I said I was 16. And he said, no, you're not. You look younger than that. And I said, okay, I'm 14, but I'm 15 next. So he knew straight away how old I was as well. And he tried using it in his defence when we got to court. He tried saying that I was 18, in a nightclub, which were just a lie. He would pick me up from school. I'd have my school uniform because I'd start to skip a lot of school as well to go and see him. So, yeah, he knew exactly how old I were.
His friendship circle, what age group were they?
All kind of similar. So he had two other brothers. He's actually got three brothers, and all three have been convicted. But the youngest brother was the same age as me. So there was three brothers called Ash, Bash, and Bono. People might know them as Ash, Bash, and Bumrash. A bit of a nickname they've got. But they was very well known, not just in Rotherham, but all over the country. And it's no exaggeration to say they run Rotherham. Everybody knew him. This wasn't him being alone, person doing all this. In fact, the three brothers, a report showed there were a minimum of 54 girls just linked to those three brothers. This was happening all over our town by him and lots of people like him.
I mean, this is a very, very personal question. But do you remember the first time that he raped you? And notice I didn't say the first time you slept together, because you sleep with an underage girl, that's rape. People need to remember that.
Yeah, and our laws don't always see it as rape, which it should be because, like we said, we're children. But yeah, I do, yeah.
How long into the relationship was it?
I think it was about a month. And it was in a property that was owned by his family. So on this one street, his family owned, I think it was 3 properties. And they'd have kind of different family members living in different properties. So the first time he did that was in one of his properties, and that was also the property that I would go on to stay in when I was missing on the run. And his family members were living there as well.
And up until the point that he first raped you, was there any sign that he was going to go on to be a violent, abusive partner?
I had no idea what was coming. I don't think anybody knew what was coming, but I started to pick up that he was involved in drugs and things, which again was, kind of not a big shock for, where I lived and grew up and stuff. As well at that time, heroin was the up-and-coming drug. He was dealing heroin. But so I saw a couple of things, and I knew that he was very known for fighting. that was pretty much about it. I mean, even throughout the whole 2 years, I didn't know that he was going around trafficking kids. So like when a girl had come up to me, and because we spent a lot of time fighting, when a girl would come up to me and say, "I was doing this and he's my boyfriend and I'm sleeping with him," he'd pass it off as either they're just lying and making it up and they're jealous, or, "Oh, it's an ex-girlfriend and she's kind of now pissed off because we're together." It wasn't until I got to about 27 years old where I recognised I was a victim of exploitation and became very suicidal, tried to kill myself. And that's when I contacted Andrew Norfolk. So I didn't realise for a long time what it was.
How long did you spend with him?
2 years in total.
2 years?
As a child.
So 2 years in what you thought was a sexual relationship when really you were subjected to rape and abuse for 2 years.
Yeah, I thought he was my boyfriend. And kind of the rest of my life, how I saw it was my boyfriend, he was violent and cheated on me all the time. And I thought that, as I say, up to the age of 27.
Talk to me about how it escalated from the first time the first rape took place, where I'm assuming he was gentle, non-aggressive. And how did that escalate over the course of 2 years? Because I can only assume that his attitude completely changed.
Yeah, it did. But again, it wasn't doom and gloom every single day. I mean, it did get that way towards the end, but it was, I suppose, a gradual. So it'd start by him kind of just shouting at me or a slap, and then kind of escalated as time went on. But for me, when I kind of sit back and kind of look at things, it's not necessarily, and I'm not saying for 1 second it's okay to do this to me, but it's not so much the rapes that I remember. It's the psychology, all the emotional side of it and the mental abuse that he did. So he would become obviously controlling, and there was times when I tried to leave, tried to get out, and then he'd beat me up or he'd try and kill me. And it got to the point where because my parents put me into care, and the authorities said to him, "If she's back at 10 o'clock and you drop off at the top of the street, then you can have access to her." And they wanted me to go back to school as well because I'd missed so much time in school. So it was now a situation where all the authorities were just completely okay with it. And so when, I was at times when I was trying to leave, and I remember saying to my foster carer, "If he phones, I don't want to speak to him." And she would say, "Well, you're going to get back with him anyway, so just speak to him." What they should have done on situations when I was trying to leave is up and get me out. But yeah, it kind of didn't happen. So yeah, there were lots of times when I was trying to get away from it and I just didn't know how.
What was it that he was doing that made you want to leave?
It just became every day that something really bad was happening, and I'd literally wake up, I'd go and see him, we'd get in an argument, he'd beat me up, he'd rape me. I'd go and then be arguing with, some girl, some of even my friends that I'd grown up with. We'd kind of have a fight, and it felt like I was just in this war zone all the time. And I knew it was because of him. I knew I had to get out. I just couldn't figure how to do it. And there was one occasion when I went to meet him and I told him I didn't want to be with him anymore. He dragged me into the car by my hair. He started speeding to the top of the street and he drove through 2 parked cars and into a church. And then there was another occasion when, again, I said I was going to leave him. We was in the car and he started driving towards the end of what I describe as like a hilltop that overlooks all Rotherham. And he was speeding towards it saying that he was going to kill us both because if he couldn't have me, then no one could. And he put the brakes on right at the last minute. I don't know how I didn't go over the edge. But I got out the car and actually wet myself. I was that scared. And he took me to the edge and said he was going to throw me off it. And then he put me into the back of the car and raped me as though nothing had happened. And I remember just laying there like I was some dead body on a slab in a morgue. And I was crying, but it was a silent cry. So, there was things like this that were just starting to happen all the time. And, that Prince Charming that I knew at the beginning was no longer there. He was a right bastard, to be honest.
So he gets you into a state where you're emotionally paralysed and in some kind of trauma bond. Mm-hmm. You're scared, you're up, you're down, and then the next minute he's raping you again. Did you ever physically push back or say no?
Oh, yeah. We'd have full-blown physical fights. And I remember actually in a situation when we was in the car and I had my 3 friends in the back seat and we was arguing. And my friends had said, don't wind him up. Don't wind him up. Because I started to get very mouthy towards him. So there were even situations where I wouldn't even wait for him to throw a punch. I'd put one in first. So there were certain things that I would do to try and defend myself. And I kind of felt, looking back, he was, I suppose, grooming me into a little version of him. And all that anger and stuff that was, kind of built inside me was coming out directly at him. So there was times when it wasn't even about fear. It was about survival. So, I spent a lot of time, kind of fighting back and, trying to say no or whatever. But when you're going up against him and the system, because, to be truthful, that's what we were doing for little girls because we weren't just going up against the gangs, we were going up against the council, the police, even the Home Office, because I knew people were working for him because I was seeing things. The police, they were corrupt. I saw him buying steroids off him. I saw him, they was giving him information. I remember being sat in the cell once when I was arrested and the copper walked in. I even remember his name. And he turned around and said, "Oh, I know you, I'm going to look after you." So I was never treated as a victim. I was treated as his girlfriend or his mistress and somebody that was a part of his gang. Because what I found out later on is that he was actually married with children, which he at first denied. I even spoke to his solicitor. His solicitor were involved in all this as well. Still remember his name, remember what car he's got and everything. And I remember being in the car and I spoke to his solicitor and he said, they're divorced. I'm the one that's dealing with the divorce, and it was all lies. So I would even take his kids out, play stepmom. It was crazy.
Wow. So the police considered you his accomplice?
Yeah.
So he was dealing heroin?
Yeah, he was involved in just about every crime you could imagine. I even said to the police, I can take you to places where bodies were carried out because of, all the stuff he was involved in.
Dead bodies?
Yeah. Basically, they was using some people as what I call a lab rat. So they was getting some clear-cut heroin in. They'd try it with people and it killed a couple of people. Now, that could have been a story for him to have scared me, or it could be real. But I said to the police, I can show you everything. It never got looked at. But, yeah, he was involved in drugs, money laundering, cars, exploitation, absolutely everything. And most criminals are. If they're involved in trafficking kids... they're going to be involved in all different types of crime.
Did he get you using drugs?
No, the drugs never kind of really played a role in my stuff. I smoked, a kind of bit of cannabis from time to time, but as well, what you've got to remember is I became pregnant twice through this. So the first time when I was 14, which I had an abortion. I didn't want to have an abortion, I'll be honest. And my mum and dad said they was going to use the DNA from the baby to prosecute him because I didn't want to prosecute him at this point because I couldn't see what was wrong. I thought this man was my boyfriend and I loved him and we were going to get married and have a family and have the white picket fence. I was very naive. But he said, well, if I go to prison for this, then my family and friends are going to blame you. I'm not going to be around to protect you. So what he said was he was going to chuck me down a flight of stairs or punch me in my stomach so I would miscarry. But he gave me a bottle of something which was called castor oil. He said if I sat in a hot bath and drank it, then the baby would die, it'd be peaceful and, everything would go back to what it was. And I actually did that. And I remember being sat in the bath and I drank it and I threw up and my mum and dad came storming into the bathroom. Which, of course, it didn't work, and I went through the termination. But, yeah, it's not something that I wanted to do. But then I became pregnant again at 15, and because the authorities had cleared it, I was allowed to keep my son.
Wow. The advice he gave you to abort your first child, that sounds like someone that's done it before.
Yeah, we know now that lots of girls were pregnant to him. Some actually had the baby like me. Some had terminations, and some children were adopted out or raised by family members. I was fortunate to keep my son because I remember being in care at the time, and my mum and dad got wind of they might try and take the baby, so they fetched me back home and helped me raise my son. And at the time when my son was born, he was locked up. So he'd kidnapped somebody, stabbed him, I think it was about 12 times with a screwdriver. And I think whilst he was at court as well, the judge caught someone passing some heroin to him. But out of all that, what he did, he only got about 6 months or so. But that 6 months was key for me because my dad cut off the phone line because he would ring me from prison. I actually tried to go into prison and see him with his sister, and they won't let me in, which was probably the only people that said it was wrong what was happening to me. But there's like, no, you're a child, you need, you need to have somebody with you. So my dad cut off the phones, and it kind of gave me the opportunity to build relationships up with my family again and get away from him. And I came back home and raised my son.
Talk me through the pregnancy.
It was obviously difficult because throughout my pregnancy, this is when things were getting kind of really, really bad and really violent. But I always say, even though, I was a baby myself, I always say my son was like an angel sent to me, because if it weren't for him, I'd be dead or in prison. So in some respects, my son saved me. And that's what helped me kind of get away from him, because I didn't want that for my son. So yeah, I went back home and I started building up relationships with my family. And I think because when I was being exploited, my mum and dad dealt with it very differently. My dad, he would go around all the streets. He'd be looking for me with my pictures because I was missing for days, weeks, even months at a time. Police told my mum and dad to expect me to be dead. They didn't have a clue where I was. So my dad would take me pictures and go to all the hotels and the B&Bs, trying to find me. My dad came a bit like a cop himself, and he was gathering all this evidence. The police actually threatened my dad and said, if you continue it, we're going to arrest you. My dad didn't care. It just continued it anyway. My dad even went to their house. He got into a physical fight with him. He told his wife and his dad everything, what had been going on. And when my dad, as time went on, he completely disowned me. He said, I want nothing to do with her, because my family saw it very black and white. Why is Sammy picking him over us? They didn't, even though they knew what was happening was wrong, they didn't understand the grooming process or why I was going back.
Brainwashing.
Yeah. So they didn't understand that. But what my mum did was different, and it was key, I think, and it's again what saved me. She never disowned me. She kind of just left that door open for me to come back. So I'm getting a bit emotional. I always get emotional when I talk about my mum. But she she left that door open for me.
For when you were ready.
Yeah. It took me 2 years, but I got there.
Yeah, I can only imagine how your mum must have been feeling, because when you're under someone's spell like that, there's no one breaking that spell.
Yeah.
You have to break it yourself.
There was even times when, this is how bold he actually got. He would sneak into my bedroom window and have sex with me while my mum and dad were in the bedroom next door, not having a clue. And I remember once we was having sex and my dad came in and he hid under the bed. So he was naked under the bed. And my dad kind of looked around. I think he might have heard some noise and obviously didn't realise he was under the bed and walked back out. But that's how kind of bold and brave he was getting. And, my mum was probably there thinking, well, at least she's here, she's safe.
At any stage, did your mum or dad try and encourage you to have an abortion?
Yeah. And it obviously didn't work a second time round. And I think they kind of, my dad, because my mum would have always supported me, but I think my dad kind of realised, well, it's happening, so it's either we support her or we don't kind of thing. So when my son was born, I was actually at home. And my mum and dad, because I had to eventually move back in with my mum and dad, because my dad bought me a flat when I had my son, so I could sit up home. He found out where I was. He was sending people there. He was parked outside all the time. And he was trying to as well kind of get me back in by buying me and my son gifts and things, which I just shut it off. And I went to court. I got a court order because professionals said they didn't want to get a court order because it would make him angry. So I went and got a private one, and I just ended up having to move back with my mum and my dad. So they came very close with my son.
Who was at the birth?
Yeah, so my mum was there, my sister, and then his family came up with balloons and things as well afterwards, which obviously my mum weren't happy about. But I'd built up a relationship with some people in his family because when I was missing, I sometimes would go and stay in his family home. So I got to know some of his sisters. I knew his brothers as well. I met his mum. So yeah, I'd kind of built up a little bit of a relationship with his family as well.
So when you actually gave birth, you were 15?
I was 15 when I got pregnant, and I just turned 16. So my birthday's on the June. My son was born in the August.
Okay, so every nurse on that ward is going to know that the baby was conceived when you was still a child and it was illegal. Was there an investigation into that?
No, there was never any investigation into it.
Into who the father was?
No, and he actually came to appointments with me. So, and there's even evidence to show this. So even when I got into a fight at school, I got sent to anger management. He was invited to come to anger management with me, and they would play me videos of pregnancy and about Asian culture and all these things. And I've actually got the paperwork now to read how they view things is just insane. And they were saying, Sammy feels in complete control and she gives him demands, and if she wants picking up or she wants food or any of these things. And as I say, I was never treated as a victim. I was treated as, his partner or his mistress. So yeah, he was invited to appointments. He also came on holiday with me, with a foster carer. He was meant to be there for the full weekend, but he left because he robbed the hotel. So...
Okay, so you fall pregnant. Halfway through your pregnancy, he goes to jail for stabbing someone, but he only gets 6 months.
Yeah.
And whilst he's in jail, you give birth to your son.
Yeah.
And then he comes back out.
Yeah.
So what happens when he comes out of jail?
I bumped into him in Rotherham town centre. I was shopping with my little boy, and my little boy were only, this were around Christmas time, so he were only about 3-4 months old. And he was trying to talk to me. He was with his brother and a friend, and I'm not having none of it. And he started kicking off. He grabbed me by my throat and he hung me over the top floor balcony in the shopping centre. And his brother came and dragged him off, and he's really kind of kicking off. He kicks over my son's pushchair with my son inside it. He's calling my son a black bastard. He says he's going to set us on fire and watch us burn. So I grabbed my son's pushchair and I just started running. And I just ran into a phone box and I pushed my son in the pushchair. And he was chasing me as well, and he's spitting in my face and saying all these things. And I was... I spoke to my sister so she can hear everything what's going off. And his brother saying, we've got to go, police are going to come. And my memory kind of goes a bit blank at that point. I don't know how I got home. But that was the first time that I contacted the police. So I'm 16 years old at this point, and I'm saying I want to officially go on record about what he's doing. I didn't recognise it as exploitation. I saw this as, he's my ex-boyfriend, and I just want the violence and the harassment to stop. And the police officer come out, and I think for my mum and dad as well, this was kind of like a real moment that, like, finally, Sammy's actually kind of seeing things for what they are. And I told the police officer what had happened, and he turned around and said, well, what do you expect? He's got every right to. You've stopped him from seeing his son. My dad went mental. I thought my dad were going to hit him. The police officer apologised and continued to take my statement, which was a complete waste of time. Now, at this point, there was my statement. I was willing to go to court. There was video footage as it was in Rotherham Town Centre. A witness was there, which was actually my mum's friend. So she said she'd, come forward. They didn't even go to question him. There were nothing whatsoever. And what evidence now shows in that I put in a complaint about that police officer at that time, but later withdrew it. I'll be honest, I have no idea why I withdrew it. I can't remember it. But the IOPC are now saying that's why they can't kind of hold him to account because I withdrew it or something like that anyway. So, yeah, that was a moment that they should have fully supported me and didn't. So what I had to do was just completely cut off from everybody I knew, my friends or anything, because they was then being targeted by him to find out where I was. My family had to move home. And I suppose I went into a little bit of witness protection, but without the help of the authorities. I just had to cut off from everybody.
Did he manage to see his son?
No, and the thing is, I actually, which I shouldn't have done at the time, but I actually said, you can see him, but I want it to be supervised and I want it to be in a safe setting because I wanted my son to have a dad. I just didn't want to be around him. And again, I kind of weren't recognising situations for it was, but he turned around and said if he couldn't see me, then he weren't interested. So that was it.
And how long did it take before he started leaving you alone?
He got shot. And he is paralysed from it. At first we got told he'd been killed. And like an absolute idiot, I felt sorry for him. And I thought, oh my God, I need to go and see him. And I got told not to because the people involved knew who me and my son were. And if I went near the hospital, then I would become a target. So I think the only reason why they didn't come for me is because they knew I weren't involved with him.
So it was a gang-related shooting?
Yeah, there was a lot of people involved in it.
And where did they shoot him?
I think he got shot a couple of times through the stomach that went into the spine, but I got told they deliberately kept him alive to punish him.
And how old were you when he got shot?
I think this was about 2004.
Were you about 19 then?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And my mum and dad are celebrating. They think this is karma for everything that he's done. They want a party and everything. And a few weeks after, my mum just suddenly drops dead. There's no warning. We don't know if she's poorly or anything like that. Looking back, I remember, kind of complaining about headaches at the time. But, she just suddenly died. And kind of that was it. And I kind of felt really angry because I thought, well, how can someone like my mum die and he live? That didn't make sense. She was a good person. He wasn't.
How old was she?
She was only young. It was just before her 47th birthday. So she was young.
That's terrible.
Yeah. But, I kind of dealt with it like I deal with everything. God went up. Because I never got therapy or counselling or anything from my exploitation. I kind of never opened up and talked to anyone. And my family didn't. It was, my dad's very cut off from his emotions anyway. It's very much, right, that's it, shut up, we don't talk about it, it's done. So I never processed things properly, and I really do believe if I would have had some kind of therapy or way of talking about it, my life could have been very different because, some of the choices, even to do with men, that I, kind of went on to make, terrible decisions, I think was because I didn't process things properly. But yeah, the wall went up. I actually went back to work the day after and I never dealt with my mum's death either.
Well, you were dealing with so much. In what order do you deal with things when you're that age as well and you're a single parent, which is occupying all your time and the majority of your emotions?
Yeah. So yeah, I kind of just didn't process it. And I think as well, that's why I always get so emotional when I talk about my mum, because I've not spoke about it. So like when I talk about my exploitation, because I've spoke about it thousands of times in the media and stuff, that was my form of therapy. It came very late in life, but So I can talk about that very much, very open, and it don't affect me emotionally. But when it comes to my mum and my son, I get very emotional.
Yeah, I get that.
And I think as well, when my mum died, I was really angry. And I remember actually, I moved out and my sister came to live with me. And some religious people came to the door. And I think they were Jehovah's Witnesses.
That'll be the one.
And and I remember being quite rude to them. And I was like, well, if there's a God, why is my mum dead? Kind of thing. So I felt very angry about her death, and kind of now, and I don't know if this is to help me deal with it, but I think my mum died for a reason. And I think a lot of things in my life I wouldn't have done and got away from if my mum still would have been alive. And I think I would have been in a very much worse place. Because I think when it comes to my family, even though I've got great memories of my family, where we don't have a relationship now, and I wouldn't have come away from that if my mum was still alive.
The timing of it was meant to be.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in, things happen in life for a reason. I think people enter our lives for a reason, and people leave it. And I think she left at the time she needed to. And as well, she always said that when she did go, she didn't want to be pulled. She didn't want to be in a situation where she couldn't see her babies. Well, babbies is what we call them in Rotherham. But just before she collapsed, she had been shopping with my son and obviously her grandson. So if she would have collapsed, let's just say, for example, in the car, things could have been a lot worse. So she died when, in the way that she always said she wanted to go. She wanted it to be sudden. She wanted to be young.
It's a very good attitude to adopt what you've done there for inner peace.
Yeah.
At the very least. Okay, so moving on from that lovely lady and them nice memories that you've got. So Arshad's now shot.
Yes.
Did you make it to see him?
No, and I'm glad I didn't. But no, I didn't go. I put mine and my son's safety first. And I kind of just kept away from it. And I didn't see him or speak to him until probably about 5 years later.
Why was that?
Worst decision in my life, if I'm honest. So I moved away from Rotherham. I was in a domestic violence relationship, but I was also having a lot of trouble with my family at the time. So I went into a safe house and I was, kind of being moved around. And I was really struggling, mentally. I was very suicidal. I was very much on my own. I was reaching out to services for help. A lot of them didn't want to help me. They said I weren't severe enough, which is just, it's untrue. I couldn't be any more needing help if I tried. And it was because of my son's school that professionals come involved, because my son got diagnosed with ADHD. I didn't even know what that was, I'll be honest. And because I was struggling, they said, how would you kind of feel if we got in contact with his dad? And I remember I was sat with a worker and a police officer, and I remember saying, a little bit of history. And again, I didn't recognise it as exploitation, but I remember saying, my parents didn't like him because they said he were a paedophile. And obviously, if you look through my records, it's all there, evidenced, whether it's medical, police, school, anything, it's all there. And they cleared him to have contact with my son, and they said, well, because he's not been in trouble for years with the police, because, when he got shot, he moved away. They didn't see it as an issue. I didn't see it as an issue because I thought, well, he can't be violent towards me. He's in a wheelchair. I didn't even recognise emotional abuse, didn't even think about that. And my son said he wanted to meet his daddy. And I'll be honest, it's the worst decision I've ever made in my life. But he... we had contact with him for probably about 6 to 9 months. I realised he's not changed at all. There's a lot of it I don't speak about, because what people need to understand is this isn't just my story to tell. It's my son's as well. And my son has actually said to me that he's ready to speak out, about things. He's not. I know he's not. I know how brutal it is out there when you share your story. So, I'm not going to share a lot of it, but there was a lot of religion that kind of played a role in his life, which I was very against. The first conversation I had, I remember saying to him, I don't want that shit around my son.
What shit was that?
The religion and how they viewed things in their beliefs. So they, for example, wanted my son to marry his cousin, and they'd be married when he was still children. They said he had to become a Muslim. They said he had to eat certain food. And when I was in a domestic relationship, not to him, I'm talking about someone else, he was a black man that converted to Islam. So I know exactly, kind of how bad things can get and how controlling that religion can be. And I didn't want that for my son. If my son wants to grow up and, become an adult and then turn to religious, and fair enough, but I just didn't want it pushed on him.
Didn't want him to be indoctrinated.
Yeah, and it was pushed on him. But as I say, he'd not kind of changed much, and I left. I started getting all the threats again. And I came back to Rotherham and I started to have contact again with my family. And, they were saying, we'll support you and, come back home to Rotherham and we can, kind of, I suppose, get through things. That was 2012. And that was, I suppose, the start of me recognising that I was a victim of exploitation. Now, at this point, even though there was things being said by my son, he still wanted contact, which I was very against. So, but he was at an age where he could get my phone, he knew his dad's number and things like that. So I was kind of challenging that as well. But I started to come to terms with things. And I remember walking into a petrol station because my sister had phoned me beforehand and she said, there's someone I want you to speak to. It's a solicitor. She knows who you are. She wants you to sue Rotherham Council and South Yorkshire Police for what happened to you. It didn't just happen to you, there were lots of people. And I just shut it down. I said, no, I'm not dealing with this. Mentally, I was just in a really bad place. But yeah, I walked into that petrol station. There was a newspaper article and it didn't name anyone. It wasn't a story. It was just saying that, and it was really important how it was worded and the language that we used. And it said 54 girls had been befriended by 3 Asian brothers. And I knew straight away it was those 3 brothers just because of how prominent they were in the town. And I picked up the newspaper and I went home and I was reading it. And, this is at the time when I was really suicidal. I started drinking and all this, realisation was coming at me and I was feeling all these different emotions and I was like, how can I have been so stupid, not to have recognised it for what it was? I felt guilty. I blamed myself, all the usual feelings that you'd have. And I thought, what the hell am I going to tell my son? Like, how am I going to tell him all of this? And it was just really difficult. So I had a complete breakdown, tried to kill myself, and mental health came out to see me. And how old were you? I was about 27 at this point. So 2012. This was about 2012 time. And I remember being sat on the chair, and when I was suicidal, it wasn't, a cry for help. I really didn't want to be here. And I'd convinced myself as well that my kids would be better off without me. And I even wrote a letter to my kids for them to read after, I were gone. Now, obviously, I know that they're not better off without me now. But obviously, when you're in such a dark place, you don't think clearly. But I started talking to one of the social workers, and I actually really liked her. And I know that my story, if you go into depth with it, it talks about a lot of corruption and negligence from professionals. But what my story shows is when professionals get it right, it really can be life-changing. And she said to me, I think that, something really bad has happened to you, and I think that you should talk to somebody about it. And I agreed. And the police officer came out to see me, and I knew she was straight away. I knew her from my childhood because her children would be cared for by my foster carer. And I also knew who she was from something else I tried to report a few years previous. So I knew that she weren't going to, to help me. So I said to her, I want you to go away and see what evidence there is to support what I'm saying. I want to come forward. So she and another police officer came back, and I didn't tell them, but I actually recorded them on my mobile phone. And it's a good job I did. But she said, oh, well, there's only one piece of evidence. It's a missing persons report. I said, well, I've got DNA from my son, 15 when I conceived. Oh, well, we won't like to tell your son because of his mental health with his ADHD and things. So, that was a no-go. I said, well, what about my safety? I said, oh, well, we can't, kind of put a cop on you all the time. And it was just like everything I was suggesting. It was just a very can't be asked attitude. So I said, okay, well, there's no point me taking it any further then. And that was it. I left it. So what I then decided to do was just go and gather all my own evidence. So I got my police files, social care files, school files, medical records, everything. And I had the tape recording from the police. And I reached out to Andrew Norfolk at the Times newspaper. And Andrew, I think at the time, was very nervous around me because he had been told that I was still in contact with the insane. So I think he probably thought I was a little bit of a spy or whatever, But I gave him all my evidence and I told him my story. And we went to print August 2013, but I had not waived my anonymity at this point. So they called me Jessica. But what I did was something different to what had been done so far in Rotherham, because my story weren't the first story that Andrew published. He was in contact with survivors, family members and professionals. So he'd been printed, I think, about a year before I came along. And the authorities were just ignoring and investigating people. Nothing was happening. So when he published my story, I thought I was going to be ignored as well. And I remember him saying, if this don't work, I don't think anything will. But I named people. I named a rapist. I named Jahangir Akhtar, who was the then deputy leader of Rotherham Council. And I named P.T. Ali. And it started the criminal investigations. So, if there's one thing I'm proud of is what my story achieved. Even though it's, caused me so much chaos in it. But it opened the criminal investigations, which was all the investigations in South Yorkshire now led by the National Crime Agency and the biggest in British history. But it also commissioned the Alexis J report, which went on and showed that 1,400 children like me were groomed, abused, raped, trafficked, tortured, and some even murdered. So the Alexis J report, and even in the investigations, even though I'm out of it now and I've testified and I've done all my bit, it's still very personal for me because that report gave us the truth. When I was coming forward and I was telling people everything what was happening, people said I was crazy. They said I needed to be sectioned. And I remember even they placed me on antidepressants because, of course, I was unwell. And they said if I stopped taking them, they'd remove my children and put my children in care. What I needed is someone to actually sit down with me and properly go into everything and to help me deal with all my trauma. And, I understand that medication can be really good for people, but I personally think what's helped me is being in the gym. That's been great for my mental health. And when people contact me, I always say do some form of fitness, but also my campaigning, because, since I spoke out in August 2013, I've spoke about things thousands of times. But that's been like therapy for me. So I've kind of got it out there. And it's now at the point where it kind of makes me physically ill now I talk about it. I think I've overdone it. So I think it's important we get that line there. But yeah, it's been really helpful for me. But Jahangir Akhtar, they did his investigation first.
And who was he?
So he was the deputy leader when my story went to print of Rotherham Council, but he is related to my perpetrator. Now, what happened on one of the occasions when I was missing, the police and Jahangir got in contact with my rapist and a no prosecution deal was made. And basically what that meant is, if you fetch her back, you won't be prosecuted. So he went to a petrol station. I can't remember if I was 14 or 15 at this time. I have to figure out my timeline. But he fetched me back, dropped me off, and he went on his way. And he's actually been found guilty on that now in court. But at the time when I exposed this, Jahangir was, saying all these stories. At first he was denying it, then he was coming up with, I saved her, I fetched her back and all this. And he stood down. So he was a Labour politician. He then got named by other people in court cases and things. But so people started to stand down, but I was still branded as this liar who's, just exaggerated and making all these things up because, people couldn't fathom that, children as young as like probably 10 and 11 years old were being, kind of raped and tortured and all this, and the authorities were turning a complete blind eye because the report showed that majority of them were Pakistani Muslim men. They didn't want to be called racist or Islamophobic. So it was easy for them to just call us little white slags and lovesick teenagers that kept going back. And if I'm honest, it's, I think probably it's even worse now in some respects of you can't kind of challenge anything if somebody's religious or a person of colour. So I don't think we've improved with everything yet, but things started happening. And that's the reason why I continued to speak out. And I remember at first, the police officer, they got removed off the case and the police said to me, okay, do you want South Yorkshire Police to deal with this or do you want the National Crime Agency? And I said South Yorkshire Police. So they dealt with the first couple of trials. But to get into court, it was, I think, 3 years. And, the previous cop was like, okay, because Andrew Norfolk went to them as a right to reply when my story was published. So everybody started going wild thinking, holy shit, Sammy's coming with a story. And they came to me and said, okay, we'll investigate it, but you don't do the story because it'll jeopardise the court case. So I had the decision, do I run the story or do I run the court case? And thank God I chose to still run the story because things would have been very, very different if the media wouldn't have been involved. I wouldn't be alive for a start if the media weren't involved. It kind of became my safety bubble. But when the new police officers come in and I was just doing interview after interview. So it was like 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it came to the point I was so scared not to do an interview. And I couldn't possibly do them all, but because people were coming forward and they were saying, well, we've seen Sammy, on the news or on Facebook or whatever. Because even though I wasn't named at that point, I was so well known in the community, everybody knew who I was anyway. And I remember the police officer saying to me, keep doing what you're doing, it's working. So it took so long because it was just building and lots of people was coming forward. But yeah, we eventually got to court and I was known as Girl J. I was kind of more so at the back of the queue as such. And it was difficult as well because the trial was Christmas time. I also, because my dad and sister were witnesses and I was very close to my sister at that point, so we weren't allowed to have contact because they would say we was cahooting together. I weren't allowed contact with a lot of the girls. So I remember seeing one girl and we couldn't even talk. We kind of just had to go in opposite directions when we saw each other out on the street. There was kind of so much around it and the whole world was watching this, it was the biggest trial of the country. And I don't know who it was. I don't know whether it was the police or not, but they tried to put a media ban on the trial. And I found out about it. And I wrote a letter and I gave it to Andrew Norfolk at the Times. And in this letter, it was me explaining to the judge why it was so important that there wasn't a media ban on it. We'd fought for years to be heard and, we're finally here. So I went into all of that and it actually worked. She lifted the media ban. There was one defendant who couldn't be named. He was my rapist brother and that's because he pleaded guilty. The police were going mental at me because I didn't even tell the police I'd wrote this letter. So they're ringing me up. They're going, oh, my God, what have you done? What have you done? If I'm honest, I couldn't give a shit. This was our time now. But of course, they was trying to protect, their job and what they were doing. But yeah, I was only meant to be in court for 2 hours. Anybody that knows me knows once I start talking, I don't shut the fuck up. So when I got in there, the first couple of questions, he's coming at me. And the only advice you're given is just answer yes or no. That's it. And so he's coming up with these questions, but it wasn't a kind of yes or no answer. And I'm sat there and I'm thinking, this guy's killing me. He's kind of really hammering me. So I just started to talk, and I'm kind of just getting out there. So my 2 hours turned into 2 days. And I remember at one point he just sat down and I think he just thought, fucking hell, because I'm just coming out with all this stuff. And what I didn't know at the time is that a lot of stuff I was saying originally wasn't allowed to be used as evidence in the court case. So that tape recording I had of the police originally weren't allowed in. But because I'm, kind of sat there telling them all these things about what's happening, it was then allowed in. But in total, there was that many charges. They had to stop because they were saying there's too many. And what was annoying for me is because I was criminally exploited as well, they wasn't charged with anything in regards to criminal exploitation. It was only the sexual side. So when I said to the police, well, why are you not charging them for the criminal stuff? And he said, well, we've got too much on the sexual exploitation. We don't even need it.
What was the criminal stuff?
So the criminal exploitation stuff, so, he would teach me how to drive. So I was driving at 14. He would take me on armed robberies, kind of getting me involved in different crimes, which is very good for perpetrators to do because what that actually does is stop you from coming forward. Because if you do, you kind of send yourself to prison. So when I came forward and exposed Rotherham, my legal team had to go and have private meetings with the police and whoever was there, I don't know if it was CPS, because I was saying to the police, well, I want to be honest about everything. He was taking me on these armed robberies and these post offices, what we're getting robbed and things. I've got all the information, I can tell you. But I was looking at going to prison myself. So I was actually looking at 102 years.
102 years?
Yeah. So that was the same amount of time that all the defendants in that trial got put together. It was the exact same number. Now, what I want to make very clear is I weren't involved in having people raped or anything like that. It was crimes such as the post offices and, kind of selling drugs and stuff like that. So, you have these people that have raped people, done all these things, and I'm looking at the same amount of time, and he's not looking at charges for taking me on robberies, but I am. So they decided that I wouldn't go on trial because I was a victim, I was a child, very rightly so. But I do honestly think if I didn't have the times back in me, I think I would have been on trial with them.
And when you come forward, because you read front page of that newspaper that there was 54 girls had said that 3 Asian men had befriended them.
Yeah.
Did you have any idea of the commercial scale that it actually was?
Oh, no. When I thought about things, I thought the 2 years that I knew him. And as well, what you've got to remember is he kept a lot of things away from me to do with the girls. So the couple of girls that was coming up, he would say, oh, they're ex-girlfriends. But then I kind of started to think, because as well, I was allowed friends. So when he was controlling me, he wouldn't completely shut me off. I was allowed friends. I mean, he raped all of them, but I was allowed them. So it was people like that I was thinking of. I thought, it might be a couple of hundred. I had no idea. And the thing is as well, what you've got to remember is when the number 1,400 came in, there's a lot of voices that have been left out of that. So, for example, I was getting contacted, and not by a great deal, but I was getting contacted by women in the Pakistani community. And they were saying, Sammy, this has happened to me as well, but I've never been able to tell anyone because it'll shame the family, I won't be able to get married, etc. Boys, in fact, one guy in Rotherham, he contacted me. In fact, he actually wanted to speak out. I was actually in the process of helping him do that. He was abused, he turned to drugs. He didn't live, he died. So there's been lots of voices lost out of the 1,400, I think.
You say that there was young boys that were being abused. So were these criminal gangs grooming young boys into becoming criminals themselves and doing the dirty work for them?
Yeah, so there was boys that were being sexually abused, but there was also boys being criminally exploited, so selling drugs, hiding weapons. I know someone that were, kind of took on robberies and things like that, just like I was. And yeah, some of them, kind of being groomed to become perpetrators as well. So there's been a lot of lost voices from the 1,400. We always talk about this happening to little girls, but truth is it's happening to boys as well.
From the same community?
Yeah.
And how old, and how young were some of these boys?
Well, they would have been the same age as me. So, this was happening to me it started when I was 14. But of course, we know that there were people younger than me as well.
And do you think grooming, abusing, raping is still going on in Rotherham, irrespective of the expose?
Oh, of course it is. I mean, what the difference is now, what you've got from when I was a kid, you've got all this online, all the social media stuff. So it's a lot easier now to access children. As before, it was, you're pretty much out on the street, wrong place, wrong time for me. But yeah, I think it's a lot easier now for paedophiles.
So when these guys are on trial, how many of them did you take to trial?
I only testified against one, but I gave information about lots that I could remember. So, but I was cross-examined by his brother's barrister.
Right.
Because before I met him, he kissed me. He was trying to groom me, but I didn't get groomed by him.
And how many of them pled not guilty?
All of them, apart from one. But what was interesting is when he pled guilty, he was actually on charges connected to the others. So when the others were saying, well, that didn't happen and I didn't do it, well, he's saying, well, actually, yeah, it did. Now, when I was talking to a police officer, he said that out of everybody, he showed the most remorseful, pleaded guilty, which I think is bollocks because he tried to have me murdered when I come forward. So that's not remorseful. What he did was he was looking at a big sentence because I'm told the torture that he did towards the children would have been up there with 35 years like his brother. So for me, he's just trying to knock some time off his time, which is actually due out now, actually, in the next couple of months.
When you was in the dock and you were being cross-examined, was there any stage where you felt like you were on trial?
Oh, yeah, all the way through it. All the way through it. And for me, I wanted to go into the room because you can do it by video link. I wanted to go in there. I wanted to see the jury. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to know that I'm a person. And I was actually very confident as a witness. I didn't cry. I didn't do anything. In fact, afterwards, when I spoke to people, they said that might actually go against you because of how kind of strong you came across. But that's my character, and I wanted to go in there and be myself. And I remember saying, there's nowhere on this planet, the last words that bastard is from me is me in tears. But and I remember a police officer saying to me as well, he says, I've seen lots of these cases and it's very difficult to watch. He says, but you, it weren't, because as I say, I was very strong and confident. But the whole time I felt on trial, even now I still get called a liar. So when I was in there wasn't many questions about my actual abuse because my evidence was so strong. They couldn't mess with it. So what I spoke about and what was aimed at me was all the media stuff, because for 3 years every day I've told the world what's happened. I've named people, I've gone into graphic detail. So they're trying to throw that at me, which they didn't really have a leg to stand on because I did nothing wrong and my evidence spoke for itself. So it was an experience that I'll never forget. And even though I was so confident, I feel like it took a piece of my soul and I've never got it back. It's really strange. And I mean, I was an adult. I could say I was confident. Imagine what it's like for kids to go into that environment. It's very daunting. You know, you walk in and it's, you know, official courtroom, and you've got all these people suited and booted. And I remember walking in as well, and before the jury got fetched in, and I walked through, and two of the barristers who was going to question me, you know, they kind of like looked and tried to intimidate me. It's very much a pantomime.
When you eventually come forward and you find the courage to do so and you want to make a change, for the perpetrators to go not guilty, what they're saying is you're lying.
Yeah.
And they're always going to get Klingons and minions and flying monkeys that are going to back them up.
Yeah.
And then you've got a gang of people saying the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of hassle I've had is insane. And I expected it from them. I mean, people even said to me, I can't believe you're still alive. I'll be honest, I do think I'll be killed for it. You know, a consequence will come to me for what I've done.
You truly believe that?
Yeah, I do, yeah. Whether they come for my son or something else, they've tried it, it's just not worked yet. But what I didn't prepare myself for is people such as activists that come for me, you know, and other survivors. So out of all the hassle, I've probably had more hassle from survivors and activists and professionals than the actual rapists. So at the beginning, they would try things like, I got told that there'd been someone to have me and a couple of others shot. They also sent a woman to my house. She was recording me and things. She was a survivor. So I was actually kind of working with her, trying to fetch her forward to the police. So the police knew about it and everything. What she was actually doing was kind of working for them. In the end, you know, police got involved and she ended up testifying against them. So in the end, she did the right thing. There was a couple of people and his family arrested for intimidation because they were threatening to kill my son. One got charged because he was taking pictures of me and my son and things. So they tried it, and I think they quickly realised, you know, she's not going to kind of back down. There's been a couple of protests about me as well in my work. Because as I say, I weren't just naming him. I was naming politicians, I was naming police officers. And a lot of people, even though I only testified against him, I opened the criminal investigation. So everybody who was going to prison, even if they're in no connection to me, they're blaming me for it. So I've had, you know, their wives kind of come at me and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I never expected it from the survivors and the activists, and I had to move home. People then put my full address with pictures online as well. It was just relentless. They served me with a gagging order, which I didn't listen to. I just went out, did that. I've faced being arrested a couple of times. I was pretty much under investigation the whole time because there were that many people coming at me with all these allegations, and of course the professionals as well. When somebody reports something, they have to investigate it. So it got to the point where there were that many. They gave me my own allocated police officer in South Yorkshire. So all that happened, I just went to one person because everything was just kind of getting lost. And as well, a lot of the people were also witnesses in investigations. So when they're putting all this stuff online and lies and stuff, what they're doing is actually damaging their own cases. And the police came out to me and they said, look, please don't press charges against them because we need them as witnesses and we don't want to jeopardise anything. So I didn't have anyone charged, and of course I don't want to have people charged, but, you know, and even now I still get it, but they've just got to stop doing it. You know, if I'd done something terribly wrong, I'd get it, but all I've done is put people in prison for raping fucking kids. Why are you on their side? Even when you're testifying against them, you're still, you know, kind of working for them and doing what they want you to do. It's just insane.
So what were they, in the end, convicted of, and what prison tariffs did they receive? So,
Sharison, who raped me, he got 35 years, which was the highest in the country for sexual exploitation. So he kind of set his own record there. And for me, he got found guilty in all 5. There was actually more than that to begin with, but they said there was that many, they had to knock him off, which included buggery because he anally raped me, didn't even know you could do that as a child, and I'd never heard of that. But the abduction stuff as well. I can't remember what else. But yeah, he got 35 years. 2 of the first trial got found not guilty.
And how many of them was there?
6 got found guilty. So 102 years between them.
Between 6. And was it evenly distributed?
No, so he got 35 years. He was the highest, and then it kind of went lower. There was 2 women involved in that as well.
What part did they play?
So Karen McGregor, she actually worked for a charity supporting children of exploitation. So what she was doing, she was actually going in to the care homes and things, getting girls out and trafficking them to taxi drivers and things. I actually remembered her because I beat a daughter up actually when I was a kid. She was bullying my foster sister, so I went and beat her up. But Shelley was interesting because she was a victim herself. She got a suspended sentence. And again, she was kind of bringing the girls in. And in the beginning, she would have been treated as a victim. And, the police were saying to her, we know what's kind of happened to you. But yeah, I don't think she cooperated. And people said, well, actually, she got me involved, so she got charged. I think it's looking for her. You had a judge that were kind of decent about stuff. Mm. But yeah, it was interesting because people think that women can't be involved in these crimes. And do you know what? There's a lot of people in my case that never got fetched to account for people facilitating stuff. So I was in a lot of flats and houses that were provided by people, and they've never been fetched to account for things. But if you look at my story, I think, I won't say look, it's a wrong word to use, but I'm very fortunate to have got a little bit of justice of what I've got, because there's some people that never get into a courtroom. So I got the criminal justice. I sued South Yorkshire Police and Rotherham Council, and I won. So some of these girls are still involved and married to perpetrators.
Did you receive compensation?
Yeah, from the police and the council. But again, they enrolled it. It was a pathetic amount. And as well, when I was in court, even after he was found guilty for me, his legal team still tried saying, we accept everybody else as a victim, but not her, because she was the girlfriend. So they even still were trying to blame me and not recognise me as a victim even after that. And what they was trying to say is that I've been paid lots of money by the media, and everybody thought, Sammy's on telly all the time. She's making millions from it. It was absolutely untrue. And I proved in court, I turned down every single penny that were offered. I knew what they were going to do. And I'll be honest, it was very tempting at times because I was so broke. I was actually borrowing money off family members for food and stuff because I was that mentally unwell. I couldn't work. I'd actually had to quit my job. I was really on my arse with it. And I turned down all the money. So they tried coming at me with quite a lot.
The day of the verdict, when they got found guilty, did they sentence them on the same day as well?
No, so that was a later day. I didn't go to the verdicts when they read it out, because if they would have been found not guilty, I don't know how I would have reacted to that. And as well with my case, there was a lot of journalists, such as Andrew Norfolk at the time, that was, I think, very nervous because we'd named them. So if he came back on any of my charges as not guilty, he could have sued me, he could have sued them. It would have been an absolute disaster. But I went to the sentencing. How
did it feel when you heard those numbers? 35 years and such like.
Yeah, we didn't expect that, to be honest, because the sentencing is so poor. For me, though, it should be life and he should never go out, because he's had a load of charges rolled over. He also went into another trial, got found guilty, and they won't put any other time on him, and I think that's wrong. But we were very fortunate to get that, so that was a success for us.
Did you see him that day?
No, he was on a video link. So I saw him on the on the link, but his brothers were there.
How was that? Did you look them in the eye?
Yeah, I did. They don't scare me anymore. You know, they forget that us little girls and boys, we grow up, don't we?
Mm.
And, you know, of course, like I said, you know, they're very dangerous people. I know a time will come where, you know, something will happen. But, and, you know, people say to me, God, I can't believe you're still in Rotherham. Why aren't you moved out? I'm not running. They want me, they can come and get me. You know, I could be anywhere. If they want me, they'll find me.
Do you bump into any of them?
Yeah, I remember years back, I bumped into a couple of the younger girls and their family. It's a little bit strange, I'll be honest, about how some people still view it, because I didn't know who they were. I didn't recognise them. They recognised me, and they were stood there telling me how beautiful I was. My son started having contact with his brothers and sisters at some point, which I found very difficult to deal with.
How old is your son now?
He's now 23. It was his birthday this week. But I think my son, obviously it's been very difficult for him because he was so young. And how do you tell your son all of this? And I had to tell him something, because even though we was anonymous in the media, he was going to school and, you know, parents were talking about it in front of kids, and kids were saying to him, I've seen your mum on telly. And for me as a victim of exploitation, I've got a voice in law. There's support services. People are trained to deal with me. They're not in children born from rape. So nobody knew how to handle my son. And it was so difficult. And I even remember on one occasion, because I had to put my son on a Section 20 because of everything, what was going on, because I needed support for him. Not just with this, but everything else, what was going off. And I needed that respite, because obviously with my younger son, he was starting to copy things as well. But I remember he was in displacement and he was smashing the whole thing up. And, you know, me and a social worker, we were just sat outside and she was crying. She was like, I just don't know what to do. And there was actually some professionals that were actually whistleblowing to me. And, you know, they were saying nobody wants to deal with your son because of all the media and just how, you know, intense everything was. So he never got that proper support. And even when, you know, we was talking about things, it just ended up in a full-blown argument. And we tried everything to get through it, and at the minute we're actually in a really, really good place. It's the best we've ever been as a family.
Oh, good.
He's older now and he's kind of seeing things for what they were. But at one point, he wanted, you know, to speak face to face to him and ask him why he'd done what he'd done. Which I get that, because I'd like to know that as well. But the thing is, he still denies it. He's not going to sit there and admit, you know, all the wrongdoing what he's done. So it's not going to help me son whatsoever. And social workers were pushing for them, you know, to go up and see him in prison, which is why I ended up going public and doing all the exposure on it. And what I'm saying to the social workers are, he's going to sit there, he's going to deny it, he's going to call me a liar. He's going to build, you know, he's going to groom my son all over again, and it's going to be me that has to deal with it all. And what I found out, my son didn't even tell me this, one of his friends told me, but he had actually spoke to my son from prison because my son was in contact with his brothers and sisters. And he spoke to him and he asked him, and, you know, as usual, he said I was lying. And I remember saying to my son, are you still in contact with him? And he went, no, I didn't even remember my birthday. And I think that shows just how vulnerable my son were, because he knows everything he's done to his mum, but he don't want contact because he didn't remember his birthday. But it was me that then got all the backlash, because he had everybody telling him things. You had people in the media, you had, you know, family, you had me, you had professionals, and he didn't know how to process it. So, you know, I'd just began all my house smashed up and things. It was just so difficult. And that's why I'm trying to fight for people like him to have a voice and to get that support and everything, because he still to this day doesn't have it.
So your abuse hasn't really ever stopped?
No. And I'll be fighting this till the day I die, because the Rotherham Council in 2018 invited him into court proceedings so he could apply for full custody or contact to my son. And he didn't actually get the papers, so he didn't turn up. But I'm sat there in court, and because the only reason why he was on this placement to begin with is because I was going to get full support for him. So they said, well, it's illegal what we're doing. He's either got to come home, but if he comes home, we're closing the case. If you put him on the full court order, things can stay exactly how they are, and legally they have to put certain support in place. And when he was in his placement, it wasn't, like a lot of cases where, as a parent, you can only see him once a week or once a month or some even just a couple of times a year. Because I wasn't a risk to him and I wasn't the one causing harm, I could see him whenever I wanted. So I'd go up and I'd sit and have tea with all the staff and everything. So I'm sat there in court thinking this is a very smooth process, and the social worker says, just to let you know, he's not coming. And I said, who's not coming? He said, Shad is saying he's not coming. And I'm like, what? I can't make any sense of it because he's in prison for 35 years. He's obviously a danger to me. He's a danger to my son. He's not even on the birth certificate. The only reason it's there in writing that, it's his dad is because I've testified against him. And I just couldn't figure out how our laws allow this. And even my ISFA worker was with me at the time, and she was like, I can't believe how calm you are. Like you're not kicking off. And that's because I just couldn't fathom what was happening. But he can even now apply for contact to see my grandson. And they've actually been in contact and said, can we have pictures of him?
So you can never, ever fully relax.
No, because as well, when we was in court, to my knowledge, there's nothing in place that he's not allowed to contact me. That should be immediately done. Parental rights are immediately stripped and no contact whatsoever. So like at the minute when I've got people contacting me, I have to then ring the police. I have to prove to them, that it's them, which, it's never going to happen because it's all on social media. They're not going to put the time and resources into all of that. So it's always just kind of been this constant fight. And, I'm a campaigner, so I'm trying to change policies and laws and get professionals to understand things better. It's just never ending.
And what policies are you trying to change?
Oh, God, everything. I've been a little bit everywhere. And some people said, Sam, you just need to stick to one thing. But the thing is, our country's that bad at dealing with this. And, they say it takes a village to raise a child. It actually takes a country to raise one. So I've focused on raising awareness. That's why I've done all the media interviews to try and, educate the public about what's going on, because a lot of people in the public didn't know. Different laws around criminal exploitation. So I'm saying that children shouldn't be criminalised when they're being exploited. Like, I was criminalised. He weren't, I was. So that needs to change. There's people like me that are now left with criminal records, so I'm trying to fight that at the minute. But I've, got to then go to court. I've got to, pay solicitors and stuff, which I've got, so I'll be representing myself. It's always a fight for us. But as well, the children born from rape. So I worked with another lady to ensure that people like my son that are born from rape are seen as victims within law, which was announced by our country. It was actually we're the first country in the world to achieve that as well, so that's a good thing. I'm asking for government to commission research to actually find out what our needs are. I'm asking for rapists to be stripped of parental rights, because if you're a man, you go rape a woman, you can then go take her child. It's absolutely ludicrous. It should never be allowed. It actually got rejected in the House of the Lords as well. So that's something I'm still trying to fight. I'm just a little bit of everywhere, which now I'm doing the online reporting with Urban Scoop, because I've worked in government and media for 11 years. I've seen how terrible it can be, but I've also seen, if you look at the work I've done with Andrew Norfolk at the Times, we made history with what we did because it was done properly. I've seen how sloppy mainstream media can be. So I want to give other people a platform to share their stories like I've had mine shared. But if you look at how bad our country is, even the rioting alone has proved how bad our country is when tackling violence against children. You know, with the riots of open courts overnight, you're getting remanded, you're straight in prison. Why aren't they doing that for rapists? You know, and all these men that are absolutely beating the shit out of women. It's because they don't care. We have a system that's unfit for purpose, but we also have a system that's working exactly how they want it to work, because they could easily change this around. And now, don't get me wrong, I know as an activist and with my story, I know I've changed the country in regards to criminal sexual exploitation of children born from rape. But with the amount of evidence that not only me, but other people have put out there, mountains should have been moved, and it's not.
Why do you think there was such a blanket cover-up of what was going on in Rotherham?
I think that, as we know, majority were Pakistani Muslim men. People are scared to be known as racist or Islamophobic because you're never allowed to say out against a Muslim. But I think as well, people directly involved in this, police officers. I think as girls and as women, we're treated as second class anyway. I don't think abuse is taken seriously enough as a whole, but when you start throwing in Pakistanis, Islam and all of that, it's just like, oh, God. You're not allowed to ever talk about it. It's wrong. We should be allowed to be able to speak about anything. I don't get offended when somebody says, oh, well, type 1, a majority of paedophiles in our country are white. I don't sit there and think, oh my God, how dare you, I'm a white person. I think, well, let's fucking tackle it then. Just get on with it and deal with it. I don't care what race you are. I don't care what religion you are. Because if people, kind of actually just did the job properly in the first place, we wouldn't be in this mess that we're in. The sad thing is, all of this could have been prevented. And exploitation is always going to happen. Child abuse is always going to be there. I'm not naive enough to think we're just going to stop it. But you've got to tackle it, and you've got to come at every single angle for it, because they're just getting away with absolutely everything.
For me, it should be it should be a lot worse.
Yeah.
But that's never going to happen, probably in our lifetime. But it should be a minimum life tariff until they take their final breath. I want the media to keep reporting on independent white male rapists. Please continue to do that. But also start reporting on gangs of people where there's a community and a common denominator, which is undeniable and indisputable, where there is a massive issue.
We're kind of going into a darker place. I mean, I didn't think you could get any darker, but I think we're heading into a very dark place where you're not going to be able to talk about anything. I mean, they're sending people to prison over such ridiculous things. People are going to prison for hurty words and holding a flag over men that are raping people.
What about the community of people that have got a certain mindset, which are predominantly on the left-hand side of politics, that will accuse people of being racists if they say anything against somebody that's brown, black or yellow? Now, imagine if you're a victim of a Pakistani grooming gang and you go onto Twitter and you see people talking about these crimes that need to be spoken about, but then they see the reaction from the group of woke individuals that then brand these people with completely incorrect labels such as racist. Surely that's going to really make them think twice about coming forward.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, I've had so much shit for 11 years. There's pretty much not anything that people haven't thrown at me. But of course, when, people, they'll come on and they'll look at all the abuse I get, of course it's going to put them off. But
have you ever been branded racist?
Oh yeah, from first day I spoke out, some people branded me that. And I think I'm only just kind of waking up, I suppose, a little bit to all the left and the right and all of this, because I've been so focused on just keeping it about the cause. Even though everything is about politics, I've tried to keep politics out of it. So over the last few months, my eyes have been open quite a lot to all the left and the right. What I find from people on the left is, and even when I've been interviewing them to do with the protests and the riots, you just can't have a conversation with these people. And I spoke to one of them and I said, people are here at this hotel because the immigrant men have been harassing and sexually assaulting children as young as 12. People have been reporting this. No one's doing all. There's evidence, that people have been reporting it. And she completely shut it down. And I said, are you saying 12-year-old children are lying? She went, yeah, I am.
I saw that.
I find if you speak to anybody, like, they just won't accept that, people of colour are also committing rape. It's just insane. But I think now, or should I say back in the day, when you got called a racist or far right, it was actually quite a scary thing. You're like, oh my God, no, of course I'm not. Now it's almost like it's a compliment, and it shouldn't be like that. I've had to deal with the actual far right through, my 11 years of activism. I've also had to deal with the far left and the right and the left. And there's good and bad and kind of all of it. But, to say somebody like me is far right is just absolute bullshit.
Well, you've also got a mixed race son.
I've got 2 mixed race sons, both of different races.
There you go.
So, but you just can't say anything now without being branded racist as thingy as well. I remember a girl, and she was a woman of colour, talking about a perpetrator, also a man of colour. She was branded racist. Another guy shared his story. He was a white guy. He never once named the race of his perpetrator. It was actually white, but he never once mentioned it. And he got said racist and far right. I got some right abuse on it. When people like me have spoke out about what's happened in Rotherham, which evidence proved majority were Pakistani Muslim men, they've said I'm racist for calling it out. Why aren't they racist for targeting majority of white, non-religious female children? Why is no one saying to them, well, you were racist to target all these white children? Why am I racist for just telling you things that have been evidenced in a court of law? I didn't tell them to go rape a load of white kids.
And at what point aren't you a racist? You've been in 2 relationships with 2 different raced men, and you've got 2 different children of different races, but yet you'll still have people call you racist. At what point are you not a racist?
I know, it's crazy. I think I've kind of proven I don't care what race somebody is. Even though I'm against, some things in religion, if somebody wants to go and follow religion, go follow it. That's your choice. But it's also my choice not to. Now, when I was in a domestic violent relationship with my youngest son's dad, he was a black man. He converted to Islam, very radical views. I was kind of forced to live my life as a Muslim woman.
What was that like?
Fucking brutal. Like, he was very radical. I got told what I could wear, what I could eat. He controlled my finances. It was far more controlling by him than it was when I was a child. And it's something I actually never speak about, but I did try to speak about it, just touch on it on X a few months back. I immediately got shut down, got told I was racist, Islamophobic. I got told by activists they're disappointed in me because it's a peaceful religion. Well, it might have been peaceful for you, but it weren't for me. I pretty much had to live like a slave. It was awful.
Go into more detail.
Well, obviously, it didn't kind of start out that way. So when we started dating, I didn't know he was religious. He kind of quickly started praying all the time. But again, it didn't really bother me. It's not my thing. I don't pray, 5 times a day. If he wants to, crack on. But he started to become very, very controlling. And, my life very quickly changed because when I met him, I was working in the clubs. I was modelling. So very different life to what I was about to go into. But so I had to live as a Muslim woman. Like I say, I had to be covered in English clothing though. I couldn't eat pork and things. So I remember once I dropped my son off at school and there was a cafe and I wanted a sausage and tomato sandwich. So I went and got one. I didn't think he'd find out. I got back, he said he could smell it and I got beat up. So, it was kind of just little stupid things like that. It was just totally controlling. And I got moved into a safe house at one point, not actually from him, it was from a situation that was happening. But you got professionals which were then witnessing things so they could see it. And even though he wasn't there living with me, he was allowed to come to the gate, which I'm surprised they're allowed to do that. But even like little things like cutlery, it wasn't allowed to be near other people's cutlery. I had to have all my own stuff. And I was heavily pregnant at the time as well, and I kept collapsing. And I kept going to the doctors, and the doctor's saying, well, because you've got all these clothes on, I'd have to wear a really long jumper, put a long coat, a hat, and, be completely covered. And he says, you need to take some layers off. This is why, you're overheating and you're collapsing. And I remember one occasion where we went to get a new coat, but the coat didn't come over my bump because I've got a big bump. So he said that weren't me being covered. So in middle of Sheffield city centre, he's absolutely beating the shit out of me for it. I weren't allowed to be in the same room as a man. So if his friend come to the flat, I'd have to wait in one room. He'd go into... It was really intense. And even things like I weren't allowed to walk with him. I had to walk in front. He said as a woman I weren't allowed an opinion. So there was a time when I was getting a new car. It was the same car. One's a 3-door, one's a 5-door. He was saying it's different. I'm saying, no, it's not. It's the same. It's just different doors. I got a smack in my face and told I'm not allowed to have an opinion. So it weren't a very pleasant experience for me. And he'd sit there and he'd read out of, his religious book, as I call it. It weren't nice.
Wow. So there you go. How can anybody deny you of your own experience?
I know, and that's the thing. And I'm not saying that every single woman has that experience. I know some Muslim women that, are very happy in their lives, and that's absolutely fine. But for the women that it's not being okay for, allow them to speak. And again, you're not allowed to criticise anything if it's connected to Islam.
And what are your views on Tommy Robinson?
I've just started to get to know Tommy. I've only met him about 3 times, but I'm working at Urban Scoop now. I've enjoyed working with him. I think obviously he's no angel. There's some things I agree with him on, some things I don't, and, some things I've called him out on. But I think and what kind of I suppose swayed me to contact him is obviously his work around raising awareness about exploitation and his documentaries. I thought his documentaries were really good.
I remember Tommy Robinson talking about grooming gangs way before the mainstream media started reporting on it, and years before the likes of Piers Morgan, Nigel Farage, before the mainstream journalists and hosts found it safe to start speaking about it. Tommy put his balls on the line, as far as I could see, years before they actually had the courage to do it. And the courage of speaking about it saves lives.
Yeah, I remember this was before I reached out to Tommy, because it was actually Tommy that fetched me back to my activism, because I kind of took time out. I said I was done with it all. But before I spoke with him, a journalist contacted me and she said, we're doing a piece of work that will talk about how exploitation was exposed. And I said, okay, so who are you interviewing? Obviously I was one of them, and she said a couple of other activists. And I said, are you going to be speaking to Tommy? And she was quite taken aback by it. She went, no, of course I'm not. And I said, well, why not? You don't have to like him, but him and the EDL, even though, he's got this terrible reputation, they still was speaking about it. They still raised awareness, which they did. I don't know how anyone can say that he didn't talk about it just because you don't like it. For me, it doesn't matter if I like you or not, if I agree with you or not. If you've done something, you've done something. And he did highlight it. And she said, well, I'll speak on it, but I'm not interviewing him, which I never heard back from her ever again. But what I will say as well about Tommy, and again, you don't have to like him or not, but I think because some people don't like him, which is obviously like the mainstream media and things, he's been removed out of, I suppose, history for highlighting it. And I can connect with that a little bit because things I've done, I've also been removed out because I'm seen as a controversial person as well. So even like the Rotherham child abuse stuff, it were proven in a court of law. It were me that exposed it and named everyone and opened the criminal investigation. But there's some people that just refuse to acknowledge that it were me because they don't like me. And I think that's wrong. Now, there's some people that say it was Tommy and only Tommy that exposed exploitation. I don't think that's true. I think exploitation was a build-up, and it was, a few people that did that. There weren't really any one kind of person beforehand that just blew it all up. There was people such as Tommy, there's me, there's Maggie, there's Julie, and all these people. So, yeah, some people just don't like to admit who was involved because they don't like them. I think as well, what I've seen in the industry, and if I'm honest, I'm just sick and tired of it, is it's all about career, your reputation, and ego. Everybody wants to jump up and say, oh, I did this, I did that. Did you really? Did you really put, yourself online? Did you sacrifice everything like we did? Because all these activists that jump up saying, yeah, I exposed it. Well, actually, the survivors that were right at the forefront of it all, that were speaking out to different journalists or, kind of going to Tommy or standing in court and doing all these things. It's us that have gone through it. And it's us that are, kind of doing the real legwork. And as survivors, we're just kind of ruled off as these damaged goods while everybody pops up as heroes, cashing in on it. It's an awful industry to work in. I mean, I left over a year ago. I was told that I shouldn't speak about all the negative things that's happening and doing all these exposures because I'm paid for them to do speaking events. So I should only promote them. That's absolutely nonsense. How can we change things if we're not allowed to criticise and talk about all the wrongdoing? So, yeah, as much as I know there's good, hard-working people in the industry, it's very frustrating for me. And I think as well it's very controlling, not just by people in the industry, but as well a lot of people on the left find it very controlling. So I've been told what books I'm allowed to read and what not to read. I got told what I can wear, how to speak, what I'm not allowed to tweet and all this, because I'm the face of rape. And I just think it's bullshit. I have a big thing when it comes to control. If I feel someone is trying to control me, then I'm gone, I'm out. And I was, kind of surrounded by some people that were trying to control me. I'd rather walk away and have no career whatsoever than to stay in an industry and kind of just turn a blind eye to what's happening, because the very people that are saying they're so against it are the ones that are the worst for committing it. And, when people, coming back to Tommy, when people say, oh my God, how can you align with him? If you think Tommy Robinson's bad, then you need to start unlooking that industry about who's actually being funded. Because I tell you right now, our government are funding paedophiles, men that have been committed to domestic violence, drug dealers, and all of this. And nobody wants to talk about it. They're actually celebrated. Why don't we start and focus on that?
Not enough kudos is given to the victims who have become survivors, who have spoken out and testified, because the 1,400 girls that testified, they didn't just testify against the creepy uncle.
Yeah.
They come out and spoke about violent gangs that are moving drugs and causing mayhem and chaos and enforcing extreme violence. And they've always got the threat of their life should they speak.
Yeah.
And they did. And they need far more praise, acknowledgement and kudos and strength to them and strength to you.
Well, thank you. But if you think as well, and I touched on this earlier, but not only as kids, but, as now kind of exposing it all, we didn't just go up against the gangs. We went up against the police, the Rotherham Council. I've got evidence of the Home Office that nobody wants to look at. We're going up against the entire system. We're not just talking about the most dangerous people. We're talking about the most powerful. It's scary stuff.
And people are now running the risk of going to jail if their opinions are deemed too strong about this kind of subject. How's it ever going to stop if people are now scared to even talk about it?
Exactly, because that's the direction it's going in. People are going to be just too terrified to talk about anything. And it's already working. You know, I've been out there, I'm interviewing people. In fact, I interviewed somebody the other day, she made me laugh, and I said, if Keir Starmer's watching this, what would you like to say? And she said, oh, nothing, I'll get locked up. And, you know, she weren't joking it. She was serious. But that's exactly what they want, because everything what's happening is about control. It's about power. And, you know, if we look at the riots, in a way, writers have just played directly into their hands, because now what they're going to say is, oh, well, it's got that bad, you actually need protecting, you know, the country need protecting, so we're going to have to bring all these secure measures in place. You've got Keir Starmer that's always talking about the Muslim community, so we're going to see a lot of more stricter laws to protect Islam. We're going to see, I think they're going to come straight for X to close that down, because that's the most kind of the bigger platform with the free speech stuff. So yeah, I think as a country we're in trouble.
I agree, and I hope, I'm not religious, but I hope and pray to whatever energy is out there that things improve. There's more harmony, there's more people united, and more children are protected, and people are prepared to say whatever offends somebody if it's going to protect the young and the vulnerable.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm assuming there's going to be more detail to your story in your book.
Yes.
And where can people find that?
So it's available now on Amazon. It's called Just a Child, and of course by me, Sammy Woodhouse.
So what is it you're doing with your life now?
Well, it's probably the happiest I've ever been in my life, if I'm honest. Things are good. I'm still on my journey. There's, you know, still a lot of things me and my son need to work on. But yeah, it's good. I'm a grandma now as well. So I've got my grandson. I've actually got two, but I only see one. So yeah, I've got my grandson. He keeps me on my toes. And yeah, kind of life for me is just about my kids, my grandson, and my work. That's it. I'll be honest, I don't have much of a social life. Relationships has been very difficult for me as well. So like when I exposed Rotherham, I was celibate for nearly 9 years. So I think that's kind of one area that I've really struggled with. I always have bad choices in bed, so I just try and avoid them now. So yeah, this you know, I just put her on, take every day as it comes, and just try and fight the great fight.
And the future, what does that hold for you?
I have no idea. We'll see.
That's kind of the exciting part of life, isn't it? So thank you for coming on. And I hope one day there's a statue of you somewhere, because you I
won't in Rotherham.
you opened the doors for a lot of people to come forward, and you gave them strength. You passed your baton of strength onto them. And as a consequence, there's a lot of people behind bars that should be. So thank you
for
doing that. And thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Cheers.